The brutal truth about how ancient humans hunted each other. You're walking through tall grass in Africa, maybe 60,000 years ago. The sun is setting. The light is turning that golden color that makes everything look both beautiful and threatening. Your group is 300 meters away. They're setting up camp near water. But you stopped here, crouching down, because you noticed something. Fresh footprints. Not from animals. From people. Not your people. Your heart rate probably increases. You don't have a radio to call back to the group. You don't have any way to warn them quickly. You just have the knowledge that somewhere nearby, in this same landscape, there's another tribe. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're looking for the same water source. Maybe they heard about the women in your camp, or the tools you made, or something one of your people did to theirs 3 seasons ago. You turn back. You move fast but quiet. And when you get there, the camp changes, the mood shifts. Weapons get closer. The children move to the center. Someone asks if you saw anything. You tell them what you found. And everyone understands, without discussion, what needs to happen next. This scene probably played out thousands of times across human prehistory, and it's shaped everything we are. But there's a version of human history that most of us learned growing up that completely misses what actually happened in that moment. We were told that ancient humans were peaceful, that warfare and violence were later inventions, that our ancestors were noble savages living in harmony until civilization corrupted them. That story is comforting. It's also roughly 180 degrees from what the evidence shows. The actual truth is darker. Ancient humans were extraordinarily violent. Not occasionally violent. Not violent in response to specific provocations. Systematically, repeatedly, organizationally violent toward each other. We have skeletal evidence from sites across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas all pointing to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Interpersonal violence, tribal conflict, and organized attacks were features of human societies long before we invented cities or governments or economies to fight over. What makes this crucial to understand is not just the historical fact. It's what it reveals about human nature itself. Because the violence wasn't random or pathological. It was strategic. It was motivated. It was, in a very real sense, rational given the circumstances these people faced. And understanding why ancient humans did what they did tells us something true about ourselves, something we've been running from ever since. Let's start with the evidence, because it's more damning than most people realize. Around 12,000 years ago, in what's now Sudan, there's an archaeological site called Jebel Sahaba. Researchers found the remains of 59 people. What made this site notable wasn't the number of bodies. It was the cause of death. Roughly 40% of them showed evidence of violent trauma, arrows lodged in bone, spear wounds, blunt force injuries. But here's the part that matters. It wasn't just young men. The dead included women and children. The burial pattern suggested these weren't warriors falling in combat. These were people who were killed at a settlement and then buried deliberately afterward. Now, 12,000 years ago is right at the boundary between hunter-gatherer and early agricultural societies. So you might think this is an outlier, evidence of violence that only emerged when people started settling down and accumulating resources. Except it's not. Go back 40,000 years. A cave in Austria called Dolny Vestines holds evidence of a massacre. 30 bodies, many of them deliberately stacked, evidence of violent injuries, arranged in a way that suggests they were killed together. Not in combat, in a deliberate slaughter. The anatomical evidence suggests this was an attack on a vulnerable population, possibly women and children from another group. The pattern continues backward through time. At Talheim in Germany, mass grave with 34 skeletons, nearly all showing signs of blunt force trauma. At Porsmos in Denmark, multiple individuals with arrow points embedded in bone. At Nile Valley sites across Sudan and Egypt, bodies showing patterns of violence so consistent they must represent actual warfare, not isolated incidents. We're talking about dozens of sites across the world, separated by continents and thousands of years, all showing the same thing. Violence between human groups was endemic, systematic, and frequent enough to leave a clear archaeological signature. But here's what makes this more interesting than just ancient people were violent. The way they were violent tells you something about their social organization and their thinking. These weren't random attacks. The pattern of injuries suggests coordinated violence. Multiple people attacking from multiple directions. Evidence of weapons. arrows, spears, stone tools designed for human-on-human combat. The targeting patterns show strategy, attacks on settlements, not just warrior-to-warrior combat. There's evidence of post-conflict mutilation and display, bodies left in ways that suggest communicating a message to survivors. This is what organized violence looks like, even at a small scale. This is not desperation. This is not accident. This is deliberate action taken collectively, with planning, with goal in mind. What were those goals? That's where human psychology becomes relevant. Because the reasons ancient humans killed each other are the same reasons humans kill each other now. The circumstances just look different. Start with resource competition. When your survival depends on controlling a specific water source, or hunting territory, or good soil, competition for those resources is literally life or death. A tribe that loses their territory doesn't just suffer economic hardship. They starve. Their children don't make it to adulthood. This isn't abstract. It's the most concrete possible stakes. Imagine you're the leader of a group of 200 people. Your hunting territory is shrinking because another tribe is encroaching. You have two options: allow your people to starve, or attack the neighboring group and take what you need. Even if you're a pacifist, and most human societies probably had at least some individuals who didn't like killing, the math of survival isn't on your side. The collective benefit outweighs individual morality. But it goes beyond resource competition. There's also the dominance problem. Humans evolved in hierarchical groups. Status matters, not just for comfort, but for access to mates, influence, and the ability to direct resources. A man's status in his tribe is partially determined by his ability to contribute to the group's success. What better way to elevate your status than to kill someone from a rival tribe? What better way to protect your group's status than to retaliate against aggression? Add revenge into this mixture. Someone from tribe B killed someone from tribe A years ago. That creates an obligation. The dead person's family needs justice. The group needs to demonstrate that killing one of their people has consequences. So they raid tribe B's camp. In the process, they kill someone. Now tribe B has an obligation to retaliate. The cycle perpetuates itself. This is where human psychology becomes a weapon. We're tribal creatures. We naturally divide the world into us and them. We're capable of profound empathy within our group and profound callousness toward outsiders. These aren't personal moral failings. They're features of human cognitive architecture. They evolved because, over millions of years, humans lived in small groups competing with other small groups. The traits that made you willing to die for your tribe or kill for your tribe were advantageous. They got passed on. In the ancestral environment, them was usually genuinely dangerous. Your tribe really did compete with other tribes for resources. They really might have attacked you. The psychology that made you suspicious, aggressive, and quick to perceive threats was adaptive. It kept you alive. But that psychology doesn't disappear when circumstances change. It's still there, underneath, ready to activate whenever you perceive a threat to your group. And humans are remarkably good at perceiving threats, especially from outsiders. So you get cycles of violence that perpetuate themselves. A raid here, retaliation there, a massacre to avenge the retaliation. Over decades and centuries, these aren't driven by systematic oppression or political philosophy. They're driven by the basic human tendency to protect your group and respond to threats against it. The evidence we have suggests that these cycles were common enough to be normal. When researchers estimate mortality rates in prehistoric societies, the numbers are striking. In some pre-contact populations, indigenous groups that maintained relatively unchanged lifestyles into the modern era, the portion of adult males who died as a result of violence ranged from 15 to 30%. That's not 20% of deaths being violent. That's roughly 20 to 30% of male adults being killed, usually by other humans. To put that in perspective, that's comparable to the mortality rates of major modern wars. The Second World War killed roughly 3% of the world's population. Some estimates of violence in prehistoric societies suggest that 20% of males died violently. That would be equivalent to a war that never ended, that continued across generations. And this wasn't exceptional. The pattern holds across cultures: Amazonian tribes, Pacific Islanders, African societies, Inuit groups, Australian Aboriginal peoples. Wherever researchers looked and found intact populations that maintained traditional lifestyles, they found evidence of systematic, frequent violence. Now here's where you might push back, and it's a legitimate pushback. We don't actually know what the rates of violence were. We have skeletal evidence that shows violence happened. We have burial patterns that suggest violence was part of life. But we're making inferences from incomplete data. Maybe violence was rare, and the bodies we find are the exceptions that happen to be excavated and studied. Maybe our estimates are too high. That's a fair point. The truth is, we can't be certain about absolute numbers. Archaeological evidence is spotty. We find the remains that survived burial and excavation. We miss the bodies that decomposed, or were exposed, or ended up in rivers. We're working with a biased sample. But there's a problem with the maybe it was rare argument. It requires assuming that violence left a smaller archaeological footprint than we'd expect, while at the same time, the evidence we do have points in the opposite direction. Sites like Jebel Sahaba aren't exceptional findings where one massacre happened. These are multiple sites across continents and time periods, all showing similar patterns. The consistency of the evidence is harder to explain if violence was actually rare. More importantly, the frequency isn't the only issue. The organization and deliberation evident in these attacks suggests this wasn't occasional or aberrant. This was part of the normal functioning of societies. There's also a psychological factor worth considering. Modern humans tend to underestimate ancient peoples. We imagine them as more peaceful and more innocent than they likely were, partly because we want to believe that violence is a modern problem created by civilization, and partly because we romanticize the past. There's a whole school of thought that says noble savage mythology, the idea of peaceful, ecologically sound, emotionally healthy ancestral peoples, emerged as a reaction to industrialization. As civilization got more violent and destructive, we projected peace onto the past. But the evidence doesn't support that projection. Ancient humans had the same capacity for violence, the same tribal psychology, the same resource competition pressures that humans experience now. The only thing that changed was scale. With small populations and stone tools, you can't wage wars that kill thousands. But the intent, the organization, the psychology, those were probably identical. So where does this leave us? With an uncomfortable truth. Humans are capable of systematic violence when the circumstances warrant it. Not some humans. Not humans who are particularly damaged, or evil, or primitive. Humans. The species. You and me. Given the right conditions, most people are capable of participating in organized violence against outsiders. The implication is unsettling. It suggests that the wars, genocides, and atrocities of modern history aren't aberrations. They're not products of civilization or government or ideology gone wrong. They're expressions of traits that run deep in human nature. We're tribal creatures who see outsiders as potential threats. We're competitive and status conscious. We're capable of profound empathy within our group and profound cruelty toward those outside it. The difference between a prehistoric raid and a modern war isn't that the people involved are fundamentally different. It's that we've scaled up the weaponry, the organization, and the ideology. We've taken the same tribal impulses that made a small group attack a neighboring settlement and turned them into systems that can mobilize millions. Understanding this doesn't excuse modern violence. It actually does the opposite. It shows that preventing violence requires understanding and working against impulses that are deeply embedded in our psychology. You can't eliminate war by changing government or ideology alone, because the underlying human tendencies will find new justifications for conflict. You have to work at the level of human nature itself. That's why this history matters. It's not satisfying to realize that your ancestors were engaged in regular violence, that the peaceful past you imagined doesn't exist. But it's necessary, because only when you understand what ancient humans actually did and why they did it, can you understand what you're capable of. Only then can you recognize when those same tribal impulses are being activated in you, when you're being encouraged to see outsiders as threats, when your group identity is being weaponized, when resource scarcity is being used to justify aggression against them. The brutal truth about how ancient humans hunted each other is that they hunted us the same way we hunt each other now, with strategy, with organization, with justification that made sense given their circumstances. The tools and the scale have changed. The fundamental psychology hasn't. So the real question isn't what ancient humans were like. The real question is, what does that tell us about what we are? And what are you going to do with that knowledge?